Maps are really weird. We always kind of look at them as if they're always fact, but for most of history, maps have really been lies. And I mean most as in even recently. They're not lies necessarily on purpose. Sometimes they were political or idealistic, or sometimes they were just straight up accidents. But they've always told us a little bit more about how we saw the world than how the world actually is. So I wanted to kind of just break into some of these lies and some of the more bizarre history instances in which this happens. And kind of also what that might say about us at the time, not just about geography, but about human belief. First, if you could really quick like and subscribe, it's totally free for you, and it essentially pays me, which is super awesome. If you can also just leave a comment for the sake of engagement, it would be amazing for you to do that. Thank you so much. For most of history, making a map was basically like guessing what your house looked like from space, only using crayons. It was inherently imprecise just because of the tools at your disposal. The first known world map goes back to ancient Babylon. Tiny clay tablets etched around 600 BC. They didn't really show continents or oceans, just a small circle of land surrounded by often what's called a bitter river. That was all the world was, as far as you were able to walk in any particular direction before hitting some impassable object. And honestly, considering they didn't have compasses yet and relied largely on landmarks and the sense of direction that they just inherently had, it's quite impressive. Then came the Greeks. A guy named Anaximander, I think, was one of the first to try and make a map of the known world. He thought the Earth was actually a perfect cylinder, but he somehow managed to figure this one out. He essentially converted many of those small disk maps into one much larger map, and that reflected quite a lot of the human presence at the time. And for what it's worth, it actually resembles these areas really well. Without labels, you could probably still recognize these areas on a map. Very good for someone who thought the Earth was a giant cylinder, not sure how he got there. By the time the 1400s rolled around, maps became the tools of empire. And competition meant exaggeration. When sailors ventured beyond the known world, mapmakers often filled this empty space of sea with sea monsters or serpents, and notes like Hic sunt draconis, here be dragons. Not because they'd seen dragons, but because somebody had explained that they did at one point, and the mapmakers had to explain the unknown. When explorers came back, the information they brought, it wasn't always accurate or consistent. You'd have one sailor saying that they saw a huge island full of gold, and another saying that they only saw fog for 2 months. A cartographer had to combine them both. They were as equally valid claims. These threatening artworks labeling maps for hundreds of years, while fun to look at today, back then I couldn't imagine sailing an ocean and seeing these drawings, hearing those stories. That's how Phantom Islands were born. Places like High Brazil, I think, Thule, and Sandy Island, they only existed on maps. For centuries, High Brazil was drawn off the coast of Ireland, I think? Yeah. Off the coast of Ireland. Round, mysterious, appearing only once every 7 years, according to legend. It was literally on the maps for hundreds of years. Sailors even tried to find it, and nobody ever could. But the map, it was there. It insisted that it was there, which made it real enough in its own way. By the time that colonial empires started dividing land, maps really became weapons. European powers used them to draw borders, often on places that they'd never actually been. Straight lines in colonized places like Africa were drawn in conference rooms thousands of miles away, sometimes using rulers and not rivers. The result, well, entire cultures were split in half and others were completely mashed together. Not because of geography or cultural relationships of the region, but just because of the European politics thousands of miles away. The map of Africa after the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885, is one of the greatest cartographic crimes in history. It turned fluid cultural regions into rigid rectangles. Many of these lines and these borders actually still exist in countries today. Maps didn't reflect the land, they kind of imposed control over it. That's often when the phrase maps equal power became very literal. The geography mistakes continued and occurred routinely throughout history. And as a Californian, I find this one especially goofy. In the 1500s, explorers thought that California was an island. Spanish cartographers believed it was completely surrounded by water, based on just one misinterpreted expedition report. The mistake was partially laziness on the expedition's part, and also a misinterpretation of the Gulf of California. The myth lasted for over 100 years, appearing in textbooks, atlases, and even official maps sent to the Vatican. It took until 1747 for the Spain's own government to officially admit that California was in fact not an island. This technically means that California on the map was more independent for longer than most countries at that time. In the 19th century, similar map errors still occurred. For decades, maps of Africa showed a massive mountain range called the Mountains of Kong, stretching across the entire western half of the continent. The problem was, these mountains, this entire mountain range, it didn't exist, not a single peak. They first appeared because of one explorer. He thought he saw distant shadows and just assumed that they were mountains there. And other map makers just copied him. Nobody verified it. So for over 70 years, atlases proudly featured a mountain range that was pure imagination. Same story with Lake Parima in South America. Drawn huge, supposedly even where El Dorado sat. But guess what? It never existed. It just looked really good on maps, so people kept it there. Because here's the dirty secret, for centuries, cartographers copied each other's mistakes, sometimes intentionally. A small arrow would echo across hundreds of maps, outliving the person who made it. Now, not all map mistakes are accidents. Some are on purpose, and on purpose for good reasons. Starting in the 20th century, map makers began inserting trap streets, fake roads, or tiny details to catch plagiarists. If your map had the same fake street, they know you'd copy it. Even major publishers like Rand McNally did it. So the next time you're walking around a city and you're looking at some old map and you can't find this Shirley Avenue, it may never have existed. But beyond copyrights, governments have also used map distortion strategically. The McCarter projection, one of the most well-known projections, the one that even we grew up with in classrooms, distorts the Earth to keep the directions consistent for navigation, but it massively inflates the size of regions near the poles. That's why if you look at a map, say on a globe or on a flat globe that you might see in a classroom, Greenland looks the same size as Africa, when in reality, Africa is actually 14 times larger. You might think that satellite imagery fixes all this, right? Well, not exactly. Digital maps still get things wrong, just in completely new ways. In 2012, Google Maps accidentally deleted an entire village in Spain from its database. The residents literally disappeared online. Delivery drivers, tourists, even local services couldn't find people. Then there's Sandy Island, which showed up on Google Maps, a mysterious island near Australia that scientists went to go verify in 2012. Except when they arrived, it wasn't there. They just saw open ocean. It had been copied over from a 19th century map error and was just persisted digitally. Even modern maps inherit these same ghosts from the 19th century. And the irony is, our reliance on GPS means that if the digital map is wrong, our reality is going to try to bend to match it. People have literally driven off cliffs or driven into lakes because the screen told them to do. And we've come full circle, trusting our beliefs of the map over our observations. When you really think about it, every map is a reflection not of the world, but kind of what we wanted the world to be at the time. Ancient maps centered around faith, the colonial maps centered around power, and modern maps we center around convenience. They tell us kind of what matters to people the most in each era. Even the mistakes, the phantom islands or the fake mountains, or vanishing roads, they're all proof that humans would rather fill in the blanks than live with the uncertainty. Because maps aren't just tools, they're stories, right? Stories about discovery, stories about ego or ambition, and about how we're always trying to draw meaning into the unknown. So next time you look at a map, that's the world. But remember, it's really just our best guess at it, for now. If you've enjoyed this, then please leave a like and subscribe. It's totally free for you, and it helps me out a bunch. If you could comment below either what your favorite map was or just a random emoji for the sake of engagement, that would be so helpful. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in the next one.